Yeah.
Yeah,
I think you, yeah. So
No,
Partha,
I'm saying that's okay. The
sequence is okay. Yeah.
is okay.
Fine. All right. We'll stick to the same sequence.
Okay. We'll start, sir.
Yes.
Yeah. A warm welcome. I welcome you all to Pune International Center, much awaited annual post-budget discussion. Let me begin by welcoming our speaker and chair of the discussion, Dr. Ajit Ranade, Professor Pinaki Chakraborty, Professor Subhashish Gangopadhyay, Professor Pathre, and Dr. Dilip Kazre, Vice President, PIC, Dr. Vijay Kerkar, PIC trustees, members, and ladies and gentlemen. We are indeed honored to have you with us today, these illustrious personalities, to share the analysis of the Union Budget that was presented in the Parliament on Tuesday, 1st February, by Honorable Union Finance Minister, Ms. Sitaraman. A brief introduction to our speakers today, who are all representing PIC institutional partners. Professor Pinaki Chakraborty, Director, National Institute of Public Policy and Public Finance and Policy, and Honorary Research Scholar at the Levy Economic Institute, New York. He holds a PhD in Economics and MPhil in Applied Economics from Center for Development Studies, Trivandrum, and MA in Economics from North Bengal University. He was Economic Advisor to 14th Finance Commission of India. He was a member of 3rd Union Territory Finance Commission appointed by Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India. He was also a member of Kerala Public Expenditure Review Committee, Government of Kerala from 2008-9 to 2010-11. He served 11th Finance Commission of India as a consultant. His research areas are public finance issues in federal settings, tax policy and resource mobilization, public expenditure management, decentralization, and public service delivery, gender and fiscal policy. Welcome, sir. Dr. Dilip Kazre, a faculty at Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, Pune. He completed his master's in agriculture economics from Dr. Punjab Rao Deshmukh Krishi Vidyapit and PhD in agriculture economics from University of Hosenheim, Stuttgart, Germany. He has more than 10 years of experience. He has taken a part in many national and international seminars. His research areas are agriculture economics, market and marketing of agro-food and supply chain in agriculture. Welcome, sir. Professor Pathre, Director, National Institute of Bank Management, NIBM Pune, a former professor at economics at Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta. During 2007-2011, he was advisor to the Executive Director, India at IMF, Washington, DC. Earlier, he was working in the specialist cadre of economist in RBI, Economic Research Development, during 1989 to 2006 in various capacities. He was Director, Department of Economics and Policy Research, RBI. He has written extensively on issues relating to monetary policy, banking, and finance. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Dr. Subhashish Gangopadhyay is the founder and research director of the Indian Development Foundation in New Delhi. He graduated in economics from Presidency College, Kolkata. He received his PhD in economics from Cornell University, USA in 1983. In 2006, he was awarded a doctorate honorary causa by the University of Gothenburg, Sweden. He is a professor of emerging market finance at University of Groningen, Netherlands, and visiting professor, Gothenburg University, Sweden. Dr. Gangopadhyay has also been a member of South Asia Chief Economist Advisory Council of the World Bank and advisor to the Competition Commission of India and on the board of Center of Analytic Finance, Indian School of Business, beside being the founder president of the Society for Promotion of Game Theory and its application. Dr. Gangopadhyay has also served on the board of the Industrial Reconstruction Bank of India as a member and as a member of the RBI Advisory Group of Bankruptcy Law and the Bankruptcy Task Force, IPD, Columbia University. Welcome, sir. Today's chairperson is Dr. Ajit Ranade, Vice Chancellor of Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics. He was Chief Economist at Aditya Birla Group based in Mumbai. He is PhD in Economics from Brown University and alumnus of both IIT Mumbai and IIM Ahmedabad. Dr. Ranade has in the professor both at CREER and IGDR. He is a member of the National Executive Committee of FICCI and Economic Policy of CII. He chairs the Research Advisory Panel of the Indian Institute of Banking and Finance. He is a member of Board of Governance of the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. He is a columnist with the Mumbai Mirror. He is also writer at a First Post, Business Standard, and Economics Times. He is a co-founder and the trustee of Association of Democratic Reforms, which is an Indian civil society group vying for transparency in the politics of India. A warm welcome once again. We are delighted that you could all hear with us today. And now, with any further ado, I hand over to Dr. Ranade. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Vishal. Thank you for the kind introduction. I join Vishal in welcoming all the participants today. And we are looking forward to an excellent discussion. We have a really eminent panel. I propose the following sequence. I'm requesting all the panelists to restrict their initial remarks to about 10 to 12 minutes. And then we'll have a round of maybe discussion, and then we will take questions from the audience. And I think the audience is requested to put their questions in the chat box. So the sequence will be, we will first have initial remarks from Professor Pinaki, followed by Professor Dilip, followed by Professor Partha, and then Professor Shubhashis. Again, requesting each panelist to please restrict themselves to about 10 to 12 minutes. So as chair of this panel, I'll take just 2 or 3 minutes to say a few things. As you know, not even a single rupee can be spent by the government of India without the consent of the public or the citizens of India. So that consent is obtained on behalf of all the citizens through our representatives, that is the Parliament, Lok Sabha. So that's why the finance bill is presented, and it has to be debated and passed. Now, the proposal that the finance minister, Honorable Finance Minister, presented on 1st of February is to spend 39.5 lakh crores, 39.5 trillion rupees belonging to you and me, or all of us. And so that will be spent in the next financial year. What are the highlights? Of course, I don't want to steal any thunder from our panelists, but the way I see it, I'll just say a few, what were the positive things and what are the negative things. According to me, just a few highlights. The positive things from the point of view of the middle class, I guess, because the people who read newspapers next morning. So there were absolutely no new taxes anywhere, except maybe crypto, but that's a different story. All expenditure, the incremental expenditure from last year is going up from 37.7 trillion to 39.5 trillion, which is by, looking at historical standard, it's going up only by 4.9%, very modest increase in expenditure. And of entirely that extra spending is going towards capital expenditure. So that is, I think it's a positive. There are a lot of novel concepts which have been introduced in this budget, such as the sovereign green bonds. That is, with a view of climate action, climate change agenda, or something like drones, drone deliveries, drone policy, or a national policy for battery swapping in anticipation of the rollout of a lot of electric vehicles, including 2-wheelers or 4-wheelers. And then, of course, bringing crypto transactions under the tax net, which means de facto recognizing crypto as a legitimate sector. What were the negatives? I mean, again, you'll hear details from our panelists, so I don't want to take negatives. Of course, I think the fact is that the deficit is still high. In fact, there was an expectation that the fiscal deficit would be not 6.4% as proposed, but perhaps 6% or lower. So as a result, what has happened is that the interest rate, there'll be a pressure on interest rates, there'll be pressure on inflationary tendency and so on. So that's one thing. And the fertilizer and food subsidies, which went up, fertilizer subsidy went up by 78% last year. And because international oil prices are going to go up and energy prices may be up, so that's that pressure. So we still are far away from rationalizing fertilizer pricing. And in light of, so this is the context. The global context is that I think the world economy is booming, according to me, but the 2 largest economies, USA and China, are going to grow at 5%. And they represent 40% of world GDP. That's really something. And that's why exports, the prospect for exports look good. We have 2 major geopolitical flashpoints. One is Ukraine, the other is Taiwan. So we don't know how it will play out this year, but they will have an impact on geopolitics and therefore maybe oil prices and some uncertainty. So we need to factor that in because that affects our exchange rates, that affects our deficit, and that also affects our external position. So anyway, those are my initial comments. So I'll now invite Professor Pinaki to give his first impressions. And as I said, please 10 to 12 minutes. Over to you, Professor Pinaki.
You
have to unmute. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Ranade. And I thank Pune International Center for giving me this opportunity. I have a small PowerPoint to share. I'll just do that and then finish it within 10 minutes. So if is it visible?
Yes, sir.
It is.
Okay. Okay, so there has been, a lot of discussions about how much government can expand because of the pandemic, and what should be the level of fiscal deficit. Is it enough, or should we do more, or we are not doing anything? So I thought, let me just look at various catastrophic events in India that has happened since independence. And I was very lucky to get a list from the RBI study on state finances. Then I have been collecting this data for the last couple of months and did a long time series to see how India's union government expenditure has moved if we plot against these events. So I'll show that data and we'll try to draw some conclusion out of it in light of what has happened in the budget 22-23. We'll talk very briefly on the fiscal consolidation strategy, on the tax revenue, central transfers to states, and conclude. So since very little time, so what I'll do, I'll start with the catastrophic events that are collected from RBI study on state finances last year. So the first one that RBI study says was Asian influenza 1957-58 affected areas, entire India, 4.4 million cases and 1,000 plus death. Then there was smallpox 1974, though the number of people affected were much less, but number of deaths were much higher than Asian influenza, 31,000, so 30 times more. Then swine flu, again, number of people affected is more, and then the COVID. So if we look at COVID, the death and the kind of spread it had since its beginning, I think it's quite significant and much more, kind of in terms of intensity is much higher. So if we, but we also have to see the India's capacity vis-a-vis these catastrophic events and to deal with it. So if we look at the Asian, this is the total expenditure of the government from 1950-51. So total government expenditure, that I mean the union government expenditure. States data is not available from 1950-51. So just union government expenditure. So every time you have these catastrophic events, including, then I put the wars, the China war, Pakistan war, and then the economic crisis of 1991. And this date, and the graph which is below is the pink one is the graph which is the revenue warning of the government. So if we look at the revenue, the total expenditure graph, I think whenever we had shocks, total expenditure has gone up. There is that I'm not, there may be many other factors, but we do find that with shock, expenditure goes up and it quickly comes down. So if we see 1961, 62 China war and 65 droughts and Pak war, except that period, it quickly came down. The only period when we had a very we had uncontrolled expansion of, if I may say so, expansion of expenditure. That was the period from 1975, 76 to 86, 87. We started contracting from 87, 88, 91, we landed in crisis. So that's the period when it is come down. It hasn't come down, and after that we do see that it has increased. In case of Asian financial crisis, in that year immediately it came down. Global financial crisis increased for 2-3 years, started coming down, and then comes the COVID, and we see government expenditure increasing sharply as a percentage of GDP, and then again started coming down. So what is happening today in 22-23 is pretty much the way it happened in earlier crisis. So that's the first point. In the case of revenue, we really don't see a major change in the revenue. We really don't see a major change. I think revenue buoyancy in the initial period though increased, but it really could not keep pace with, and that's natural, could not keep pace with the kind of expenditure enhancements that was done on the in this period. So if we look at what is happening today, is pretty much what was happening earlier in terms of responding to the crisis and then immediately trying to bring it down. That's the way this budget also has done. And if we look at the imbalances in terms of fiscal and revenue deficit, same story emerges. We do see that, and this also shows that unless we control expenditure, there is very little that we can do when it comes to when it comes to the level of fiscal deficit. So that's very clear from these three graphs. And as you see, the debt level was reached to more than 65% in 2008-4-5, and then it gradually started coming down, and then again it went up because of the COVID crisis. So that is the kind of long run trend that we see. So the point which I'm trying to say is that it's fiscal expansion for a sustained period of time, probably not good for the macroeconomy, and wherever we have done that, I think we landed up in crisis. That's the point. And from that point of view, this budget is important. But now there is this discussion about fiscal consolidation on and key challenges. There is a lot of discussion about whether it should have been there should have been a quantified path versus direction, or should the direction of fiscal correction be the norm. I think we are no longer talking about 3% fiscal deficit, which was the idea even in 2018-19. So we are now talking about a fiscal deficit which is 4.5%, which will be 4.5%, which is expected to be 4.5% in 2025-26. Now, if not 3, 4.5. So, and then we have a debt ratio which is 60 for the center, and then the states we have a debt ratio which is around about 25%. So we are actually talking about 88-89% of the debt to GDP ratio. So certainly we need to talk about the direction of fiscal reform and a sharp reduction in deficit. In 2021 RE, interest payment is 25.7% of the revenue expenditure and 39.14% of the revenue receipts. And this lag, as Professor Ranade was mentioning in the beginning, 39 lakh crore is our expenditure. Out of that, 9.56 lakh crore is interest payment. So and scope for fiscal expansion in that context is limited and needs to be factored in any fiscal consolidation strategy. Now, this is what is happening to interest payment. I think we were not talking about interest payment for quite some time, but again, I think interest payment, the debt servicing cost has really gone up. It was 35% in 12-13, and today the debt servicing cost is 42%. So, and this means automatic reduction in expenditure for other services in social and economic sector, and as a percentage of GDP also it has sharply increased. So the fiscal space for primary expenditure has reduced because of rising interest payment. So there is a need to, in the medium term, to bring down the fiscal deficit and GDP ratio, and the scope for fiscal expansion, I think, is very limited. Now let me talk about central transfer to states and the union budget in the context of 22-23. I think sources of fiscal imbalance also is very important to analyze. I am not talking about tax devolution because that does not get into the consolidated fund of Government of India, so it does not affect the fiscal deficit in a direct sense. But if we look at there's the other transfers where we are seeing CSS, then the tax devolution, grants to states, and total transfers to states as a percentage of GDP. Actually, it has increased from around 6% to 6.80%. This does not include the compensation, and this also does not include the back-to-back loan given to the state as a part of compensation. So the actual money flow to the state is more than what is presented here. And also it does not include the 2% extra borrowing power that was given to the states. Why I'm saying this, I'll just come to that a little later. And if we look at the CSS, now CSS is contributing something like, used to contribute something like 60% of the revenue deficit. This bar diagram is the CSS contribution to revenue deficit. And that had come down because revenue deficit went up very sharply in 2021 to 26.49%, and now in the year 22-23 budget it is again 44.71%. So when you are talking about CSS reform, it is not about how much money should be allocated to MGNREGA or something else. I think it is also about what is the fiscal space available and what is the implication of increasing CSS on overall fiscal imbalance. It has become a macro fiscal imbalance issue. So we are talking about subsidy reform. We are talking about reduction in revenue deficit. We are really not able to talk about much about CSS because there are political economy issues. And also we are not able to contain interest payments. So that is the other point that I wanted to make. That is, so CSS continues to remain as a source of major source of fiscal imbalance. And if we look at the pre and post COVID transfers, this is the kind of story. So I have taken pre-COVID 5 years, post COVID whatever data is available, and if we look at tax devolution, of course, because taxes have declined, grants have offset that to an extent, and overall there is a marginal increase in the tax, the total transfer to states post COVID. But this again does not include the extra borrowing power that was given to the states to deal with the pandemic and the revenue shortage. Now, what are the issues that is coming out from this budget if we against this number? I'll just say 3 words and stop it. I think it is, if we look at that overall tax growth and buoyancy for the period 2011-12 to 2019-20, it was less than 1, around 0.96. And in this year's budget, the top tax buoyancy is kept at around 0.9. So it is not even 1. So, and I had just made a calculation, and it shows that if the tax growth was 11%, which is the GDP growth rate in this year's budget, the fiscal deficit would have been 6.25%. So there is a conservative, the tax estimate is conservative, and this conservative tax estimate would mean if there is a higher revenue growth, and if we are able to maintain this level of revenue expenditure, should be able to reduce the fiscal deficit to a level lower than 6.4. Second issue I wanted to say, the tax devolution to the states as per RE 2021 to 2021 RE compared to 20 compared to the BE is has increased, and this is 79.98 thousand crores. So that's almost it's 0.8 trillion rupees. So that has gone as higher tax devolution because of the increase in taxes. Now in this context, if we look at kind of cash surplus states are holding, I think a push towards higher spending for the next 2 months can itself increase public investments. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that there is existing fiscal space needs to be utilized for higher public investment, which is possible, and states are holding back on reserves, which is a phenomenon which we had seen earlier also, but I think in times of pandemic where we need more public investment, I think holding cash reserves is probably not the right thing to do. And on the question of expenditure increase, there has been 46% increase in general central government expenditure between 2019-20, that is pre-pandemic year, and 20-23, from 27 lakh crore to 39 lakh crore. I think that increase of 46% is quite significant. So in that context, if we look at the interest payment taking away more than 42% of the revenue, I think there is a need to consolidate, reduce deficit, and have a sustainable debt and deficit regime so that we can spend on critical services that is required for growth and recovery. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Pinaki, and thank you for the crisp comments. So quite a few takeaways, the macro fiscal imbalance caution that you say. 1/4 of expenditure is simply on interest, 10 out of 40. And out of 27 lakh crores of revenue, it's 40%. It's almost nearly half of revenue just simply go to pay interest. Anyway, let me quickly move to Professor Dilip Kazare for his comments, and again requesting you to keep it to about 10 to 12 minutes. Yeah, Dilip, please.
Yes.
I think you'll have to unshare Professor Pinaki. So
I'm trying to do that.
So while Dr. Dilip comes up, I just want to flag one question in Professor Pinaki, so you can keep your answer ready. Mr. Kiran Karnik has raised a good question that some of the corporates have, their incomes have grown dramatically. So if we want to have some fiscal space, would you consider a tax on the super profits? But let me come back to the answer later, but just so that you can munch on it. Okay, Dr. Dilip, over to you.
Yeah, first of all, thank you, PIC and Professor Ranade for giving me this opportunity to put my views on the agriculture and rural sector in the Union Budget Financial 22-23. Yeah, before just putting my view and analyzing budget and takeaways, I'll just give some background, which is really important to understand while working understanding the budget on agriculture. So last 2-3 years we have seen there were three, one of the important reform was related to 3 farm laws which were discussed, debated longly, and then farmers protest for more than 1 year, and then repealing of the farms laws. That has had an impact on this budget. Then one of the important thing which was demanded by the farmer was the legalizing the MSP. That was one of the demand from farmer side. And during pandemic time, this agriculture sector was a really bright spot, has shown 3 to 4% growth. That was kind of a good thing. Then last year, last 2-3 years, there was good rainfall. If you look at the area under net zone area, it was 14 crore hectare. Out of this 40, around 50% is irrigated, but only 19% is under micro irrigation. If you look at this food grade production, which is quite high, 308 million metric ton, while oilseed has shown 6 to 7% growth. But the important concern is this edible oil production. That's around, domestically, we produce around 8 million metric ton and then import 13.4 million metric ton. And then we have Food Security Act. Under this act, we have to keep some buffer food stock. That's mandatory around 21 million ton, while we have with FCI, this with government, it's 87 million tons. So that is one of the concern here. And then one of the important argument which was made by the government of India in 2016, that's a doubling of farmer income by 22. So because of that also this budget was having some more expectation from the public side. If we look at this figure which are published by the government in 16, the income was around 96,000, which has gone from the government figure. It shows that it has gone to 1,22,000. That shows that annually around 4 to 5% growth it has shown. While one of the important figure which offers from this situation of agriculture household survey, that's livestock has when the share of this livestock in household income has increased up to 16%. So these are some background figures. While in budget, government key points were related to agriculture, where they want to go for natural farming, value chain, particularly focusing on millet, then branding at national level, international level, and also they have comprehensive scheme for oilseed will be, proposed. Yeah. Then another thing is the digital agriculture. They talk about Kisan drone, which will be based on PPP model, and again use of this startup funding of startup through NABARD. So that's kind of going towards the technology. So that could be the one solution where government thinks. Then river linkage project. That's they talk about one project for which when they're starting, and then few more projects. DPR is in the final stage, and also focus on micro irrigation, which is we have seen this level of micro 50% nearly is only irrigated. Then they're talking about the comprehensive package for food processing will be provided. Then focus on agri-education, research and extension. They talk about revision of the syllabus in agriculture university, and also about the extension activity research there, because there are findings from the some reports. It tells that if you invest more on education and research, that have more returns. Then renewable energy, that's the solar pumps, and then again things coming to the solar farms where Annadata, Urja producing it, these kind of things. These were the budget. So quick look related to how much budget allocation. If you look at the crop production, so MSP budget, for the MSP it has marginally reduced from So the budget right now they're allocating 2.37 lakh crore. Fertilizer subsidies are cut down by 25%. Then crop insurance nearly same, very minus reduction is there. PM Kisan, that's income support, which is marginal increase to 68,000 crore. Then there are other schemes which are under the Rashtriya Krishi Kash Yojana and Krishi Unnati, where the government focuses on oil seed and oil palm. Outlays increased from 100 crores to 1,500 crores. Also the horticulture also, they have increased around 300 crores for horticulture. So if you look at this, what are the figures, and we can gauge from that, it looks like that government want to reduce food grain production and increase the palm, oil seed and oil palm. Yeah, and then also focusing on the horticulture. So the reason could be reducing the fertilizer. Another, but I interpret that government, since they want to go for natural farming, they want to use reduce the use of chemical fertilizer. So marginal reduction in MSP shows that gradually in future they may reduce the MSP, but keeping pace with or keeping the income support for the farmers. Then if you look at the allied sector, where animal husbandry, the outlay has increased by 26%, fisheries 70%, and for beekeeping also there is a good amount they have kept, it's around 500 crore. So if you look at this, as we had discussed earlier, the animal husbandry share has increased by 15%. That shows that if you want to increase farmers' income, the allied sector is the key. Then if you look at the cooperation and allied, the digital agriculture, where there is around 50% rise in outlay for the farmer producer organization. Then they talk about agri-marketing, digital agriculture extension, so which has increased from 1,500 to 1,870 crore. So at least government is setting a roadmap to increase farm income by investing in technology, and then also through the cooperation, because individual farmers can't go with that. So therefore this FPOs came in a picture, and then we have seen this drones and all these things, though it looks so fancy things, but yeah, that has really good use, and that's not, you can harvest the benefit in a year or something like. It's a long run roadmap. Then if you look at the renewable energy for agriculture, solar pump, that mission, PM Kusum Yojana was launched, 2 years back, and then now they're focusing on the solar panel. So, but which has limited success so far. Then what are the takeaways from the budget? First is there are plenty of, if you analyze the outlay for a different scheme and all that, there are a number of schemes where the schemes or where the budget is unutilized. So what we can do there for that? It's need a critical evaluation, and then let's see. Those is agriculture is state subject, But yeah, in agriculture, I mean, center plays a crucial role. So we need to evaluate that maybe protocols, things for this schemes can be changed, and then by starting, things can be improved. So overall, if you look at the agriculture, it's not kind of Jumla or something like that, giving a lot of things in this. It shows the long-term vision for the agriculture development. And then, as we have seen, this edible oil prices has doubled or more than doubled during the pandemic's time. Yeah, so they're pushing this a lot for the edible oil sufficiency of the pendant. And then another important thing that's created scope for agri-tech relative services and this kind of startups, agri-advisory. I mean, you use the technology from end to end. Yeah, so from the planning till the marketing, the produce, then understanding customer, for all these things, there is this technology, because if you look at the penetration of mobile phones and all these things, I mean, that the systems are already there. We need to create ecosystem. For that, government is pushing. Then next is a precision agri and climate resilience agri demand for more expenditure on education and R&D. Since the government talks a lot about the agriculture and all this, if you look at this vacancies in the agriculture university, there are 50% nearly in some universities. So some universities are selling their lands to, fulfill their expenditure. So I say there should be sharp increase in the expenditure or this outlay for the education and research, which is very less. If you look at this, variety development, germplasm, there's a climate resilience and purpose, it should be much, much more. Then another thing is farm consolidation. It's impossible if you look at this, because farm sizes are going down day by day. So, but if you look at consider what could be the solution for that, the solution is that through FPOs, at least at a managerial level, you can consolidate them. So farmers can come together and does the things together from procurement of the seeds and all this stuff to the marketing, and that's informed decision can be made much, much better when they come together. Then the last thing is that better execution of schemes is critically for the healthy and sustainable food systems. So, I mean, that's the problem with the agriculture scheme. If you want to have now, the government focus is natural food in a sustainable manner. So for that, the execution of scheme is a critical for the, from government side. Yeah. So that's it from my side. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Dilip. I noticed a few points which will come back to the discussion, but just very quickly, if you can tell me the answer. You say a lot of schemes are unutilized. Can you give an example where the budget allocates, but nothing is utilized from the budget? Any example you can think of?
Even if you look at micro irrigation, then there are a lot of, micro irrigation, it was not used. Even if you look at the PM Kusum also, it was not used. Yeah, there are a number of issues. That 1 unit cost, the pump and solar, that cost around maybe 2.5 lakh, and then 30% farmers have to pay. So there are unutilized. Yeah.
But I also was a little alarmed when you said that universities are selling land. So we'll talk about it separately.
There are some cases in university. Yeah.
Yeah, since now I'm in a university. Okay. I hope that's not the way to do it. Anyway, so thank you, Dr. Dilip. So we'll now go to Professor Partha Ray, NIPM. Partha.
Sorry, can this be unshared so that I can share mine?
Yeah, so Dr. Dilip, you'll have to unshare.
Yes.
Yeah. So Partha Ray is also a former central banker, so he's wearing multiple hats, professor and central banker. And over to you.
Yeah, sure. Is this visible?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
You can make it, I don't know if it can be doing the slideshow format.
Then it will be better, perhaps. Yeah. I have never understood the hype about union budget in India. I have not seen this kind of a hype anywhere else in the world. I don't know whether it's a British tradition or in the true sense of our, aspiring to ask alms from the god and goddesses. I don't know, but otherwise, budget with a reasonably stable tax structure, there should be one number in the budget that we could be discussing, namely the fiscal deficit and the associated debt. But anyway, so that be that as it may, in India, budget has always been a hugely hugely important media event. Now, I thought I'll be talking about the macroeconomics of the budget and where it could go wrong and where it is right. So first, where does India stand at the current juncture? These numbers are from IMF's projections, January 22 projection. For the comparison sake, I have shown them. First, we have been told enough that in 21-22, the growth rate in India has been highest almost across the major countries in the world. That's true. But please note that the growth rate, the contraction in 2020 was one of the steepest. In fact, among the emerging markets, with the sole exception of Mexico, India experienced the steepest fall in its growth rate. It is minus 7.3 as per IMF calculation. Yes, next year we are going to, again, projection, so are very nice. And in terms of October to January, this 3 months period of updation in projection, India experienced the highest updation in projection. Therefore, things have improved in recent times. If you just think it over 2019, the pre-pandemic year as 100, then where do we stand? By the end of 22 March, we will have as if we are just back to the pre-pandemic level. So we have exactly 1 year lost. With the next year, we will be much up. So in some way, pandemic has taken away 1 full year from our otherwise happy growth experience. Looking further, looking at the Indian data, yes, this was one of the steepest in fall in 2021. In fact, this is the steepest fall since 50-51. In terms of pure growth rate numbers, this is one of the steepest fall. The good thing is, if you look at the first lockdown and the second wave, clearly the dip in the first lockdown was much more than the second wave. Second wave, we have learned, you expect in the third wave, the dip will be much, much less. So in some way, either the virus have been weakening or we have been stronger, or perhaps a combination of both. Purely in terms of sectoral stories, something interesting emerged. Agriculture was not affected that much by pandemic. Industry was affected, but it recovered. But the services sector, which is something like 55% of your GDP, is yet to recover. So if you take 2019-20 as 100, the services sector in 21-22 is still 99.2. And the steepest fall in that case happened in case of hotel, trade, transport, communication, and others. That's one sector that has been really the victim of the cruel pandemic. And now we need to see whether the budget has done something there. That's one of the sectors that suffered. And please do remember, in services sector, if it is more than 55%, that might act as a drag tomorrow, day after. Okay, in 22-23, they're expecting a growth of 8 to 8.5. Now, when you look at the numbers, there's a footnote to the budget as a glance, which said that they are expecting something like 11.1% as a nominal GDP. Now, coupled with that, if you think of real GDP to be 8, 11.1, and nominal GDP, then the inflation projection would be around 3 to 3.5. Is it too ambitious? Is it too optimistic? Be that as it may, if the inflation numbers is going to be higher, growth rate, assume for the time being it's 8%, therefore next year we might get very impressive deficit numbers, because the denominator is going to be much higher in the days to come because of purely higher inflation, and therefore nominal GDP might go up. What are the assumptions behind this 8.0%? Assumptions are no pandemic related disruption further. We understand if something happens, we can't do anything. Normal monsoon, we understand. The third, an economic survey said it very clearly, orderly withdrawal of monetary stimulus by major central banks. We do not know that much. Mr. Powell has already hinted something he's going to do in the next policy meeting, and therefore there could be associated FII flows, FII outflows, and things might go up. And the assumption is sub US 70 to 75 oil prices, which has already been breached. It is 85 plus happening over the last 1 week. Therefore, at least two of these two assumptions, namely orderly withdrawal of monetary stimulus by major central banks and sub 70, 75 oil prices, could go wrong. And of course, there are associated issues about employment and informal sector. Because one of the casualties of the pandemic-related disruption has been informal sector and associated impact on employment. So that's other concern. Other important thing is we almost have a secular decline in gross capital formation. Over the last 10 years, there's a secular decline in gross capital formation from something like 40% to something like 32% now. So this budget has done some turnaround there. They have proposed something, a substantial increase in capital expenditure. But please understand, these need to negate the last 10 years of a secular fall in capital expenditure. The other unknown in this story is inflation. While RBI looks at the CPI inflation, the WPI is currently quite high and there is a very high wage. We do not have a good handle why there's such a difference between them, excepting that WPI has much more manufacturing item, CPI has much more food and housing, excepting that whether tomorrow the WPI is going to come back and RBI could do some policy reversal, which could have associated impact on the growth is altogether a different question. And the right-hand side chart is from the RBI December policy. The extent of the fan chart tells us this huge degree of uncertainty when it comes to inflation projection, particularly imported inflation could make things worse. Already, Professor Pinaki Chakraborty has discussed that the fiscal deficit has been in some way in terms of the longer term fiscal consolidation. But end of the day, it is a finance minister's job is to have a fine balancing act to spend more in a crisis year at the same time, be in the longer term tune of fiscal consolidation. So that's what she has tried to do, perhaps some little bit balancing. Could it be more than, should it be slightly much more aggressive than 6.4%, as Dr. Ranade pointed out in his initial remarks, is something to see. Of course, we know the capital expenditure has been prioritized in terms of numbers. If you look at it, if you took the composition, I've looked at the capital account. This was in terms of revenue receipts and capital receipts, the composition is similar. Last year and this year, 55% of the total receipts is revenue and 45% from capital, which is essentially the borrowing. Now, in terms of capital account, there is a clearly distinct 3 percentage point shift from 16 to 19. If you add the grants in aid for creation of capital assets, then the current number could be something like 27, 26, 27, which seems to be pretty high. The other thing that did not happen, and there has not been perhaps not much discussion, there's been huge downfall in the disinvestment proceeds. Whether disinvestment should be part of the budget is altogether a different question. IMF sort of tweaks it outside the budget, and in some way that makes ample sense. But we need to know going forward what would be the policy there. What's the broad philosophy? Capital expenditure, infrastructure. Repeatedly, finance minister used the word crowding in. That's a very nice thing. But only thing is you are expecting then the rate of interest will not go high. The initial impact, initial response of the bond market has been slightly adverse. Of course, investment multiplier, underneath all these investment multiplier of something like 2.3, 2.5 would be operative. Therefore, capex investment of additional 7.5 billion would have a huge income. And of course, this emphasis on capex driven by these 7 engines that would have multiplier effect. Challenges ahead. Of course, first challenge is could be the portfolio outflows that could have impact on the asset markets. Change in inflation could be the other. Everywhere inflation has become a phenomenon. I don't remember to have seen 7% inflation in US earlier. I mean, perhaps in Volcker years, but 7% looks too high. Therefore, the challenges would be imported inflation, trickle-down strategy, the formal-informal linkage, how this extra additional aggressive capital expenditure will translate into informal sector output and employment is altogether a different question. Employment generation needs to accompany, and certain pandemic affected sectors, as I said, hospitality, need special care.
Okay.
I'll end here. I'll have just one slide. I'll take half a minute to show one of the things we always say, that when will India become a 5 trillion economy? So I thought in this context, that's an interesting thing. These are IMF's October number. Obviously, there are implicit growth, inflation, and exchange rate. There are 3 ways in which you can grow higher growth. These are nominal numbers, higher inflation, and an appreciated exchange rate. It leaves to be seen in what way we can achieve that 5 trillion economy. As of now, it looks slightly difficult. I'll stop here.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Partha. Very sharp, very crisp. I think you flagged the risk of inflation next year, so that the nominal GDP growth, which has been projected at a modest 11%, may actually go up to 12, 13. That's what happened this year, by the way. It happened. Nominal GDP was a full 3% higher, as you know, which is something like 6-7 lakh crores higher. And that resulted in higher tax revenues, resulted in many nice things. But you also cautioned about higher interest rates and so on. So I'm going to invite Professor Shubhashish now.
Thank you, Ajit, and thank you for saying the last point that you made, that high inflation may be a good idea, after all. A lot has been said and a lot of data have been put up and explained, and I'd like to first also thank the previous fellow panelists for giving such a crisp, sharp, and decidedly things to worry about or we feel good about as we move forward. And to me, this budget was important because it was a post-COVID or a recovery budget, right? And in that sense, I was obviously looking at job creation, because a lot of people, especially at the lower ends and at the informal sector, had lost their jobs. And even those who, kept their jobs at the lower levels, not you and me, at the lower levels actually also had a loss in earnings, even if they had kept their jobs. Right? So I was looking at specifically at what the budget is going to do for that turnaround. And I must say that the finance minister's substantive portion of the budget speech started with the focus on investment in infrastructure. And that clearly is a job-creating sector. So in that sense, I was happy to see that. It was mentioned a little while ago that in the services sector, the loss in jobs has mainly been in trade, hotels and restaurants and that. And if I connect that to what has been, remember that 50,000 crore that has been set aside only for hospitality sector. So those were, sort of good things in the budget, and I was happy to see that. See, one of the things I feel that is necessary for us, given that both investment and consumption, consumption is also down. And again, it was just mentioned that there has been a secular decline in gross capital formation. So, and even though foreign direct investment, we are jumping around, please understand that it's difficult to get foreign direct investment, especially when you look at China and all of that, that we are still at a very, very low level. And the way to get foreign direct investment is if there is domestic investment, right? If the domestic investors are not investing, I doubt whether you can bring in foreign investors by giving all the subs that are necessary, because the first question they will ask, why are the people in the country not investing? Right? So this is a really important thing. And I believe, or I hope that this government focus on building public infrastructure would crowd in private investment. So I'm hoping for that, and job creation would give the demand boost that is necessary for the MSMEs and those enterprises to start picking up speed, right? I don't think credit, soft loans and all of that, or easy credit, increased liquidity will really help them unless they can be sure that there are people to buy the products that they're producing. So in that sense, job creation helps in a very, very big way. So I would start by saying that it was heartening for me to see this focus on public infrastructure. The other part of public infrastructure that was definitely talked about was the public digital infrastructure. There was a lot of focus on that. Almost everything is now becoming digital. That has become the new mantra. Now, the only point I have there for the moment is that what sort of jobs does the public digital infrastructure create? Now, in terms of e-commerce and all of that, it clearly develops a lot of jobs at the skilled, I shouldn't say skilled, but semi-skilled or unskilled levels. So, that's again a good thing. But how much does it attract new innovation on the digital infrastructure that is being created is something that one has to look at and hope that it works. The reason why I say this is because if you look at the UPI, it has greatly helped, right, the consumers in transacting. A lot of activities, transactions have taken place, but it's still those 2 or 3 big foreign tech companies that are controlling, more than 85–86% of all transactions. So one of the things to worry about, I agree that the public digital infrastructure is essential, but the way it is being generated, how much does it bring in domestic players is important, because remember, these do not themselves create jobs, but because of the activity on them, it has a huge multiplier effect. So in that sense, while I'm all for public digital infrastructure, I do hope that it has the impact that one is hoping for. The one problem I have is that the green bonds, which is a great idea, nothing much was said, so we have no clue how is it going to be operated. The other thing is that 1 lakh crore, which is going to be given to the states for investment purposes, I do hope that the states don't substitute their own expenditures with this money. And so that's, otherwise it's a great idea. We are in a federal structure, and I do believe that much of the economic activities that need to be done by the government is actually at the state level. The center, short of giving money, can do very little. If we want investment and all to pick up, it has to be the states that have to get their acts together. And in that sense, I like the idea of leaving it to the states to decide on these issues, but how it will be done and which states will get it, will every state have the capacity to use the money, or will only the better states be able to make use of this? These are things to ponder about. But it is a step in the right direction, but requires more work. We cannot talk about this budget, and I'm very happy to see that no one mentioned before me. It is very difficult to come at the end and try to say something different. That nobody mentioned in depth at the central bank digital currency, right? E-rupee. Now, I think this opens up a whole new area, and we should think carefully about this as to how, again, there was no plan that was told to us, so we don't know how they're thinking about it. But certainly one of the issues that comes up, and something that the NIBM, I was afraid that it would be mentioned, taking my point away, but that what impact will it have on the banking sector? That if customers are directly dealing with the RBI, then what is the credit creation role or the money creation role of commercial banks? And how much will the RBI be involved in actual banking activities? Now, unless these things are tokenized, maybe, then the banks can continue to play a role. But since it was not stated what the RBI is thinking about, I don't know what the thing is, but I'm really waiting to see how this is being planned and how is it going to be executed. And since Professor Ray has been with the central bank and is now at the NIPM, right? So maybe he can shed some light on this. Sorry, as a fellow panelist, I'm asking a question of another panelist, but because I'm excited by what the RBI is thinking about it. So for me, the one thing that I did not like in the budget is that there was, while we were hoping that jobs would be created through increased demand, increased investment, and all of that, there was no actual focus. There was no thought process in it, right? For example, the way Professor Ray put it when he talked about trade, hotels, and restaurants. So sorry, trade, the three things that you mentioned. Let's talk about the hospitality sector, right? That if those statements were made, then it would make you feel confident that they are looking at this issue of creating new jobs and better, productive, more productive jobs. Dilip talked about the agricultural sector and research and all of that. These are all, these are new things that we are hearing in the budget. And as a researcher, it's exciting to hear about these things. That finally somebody is thinking that yes, research is important. We cannot keep waiting for researchers abroad to tell something for us to follow. We have to get involved in the act inside the country, because we have to do research that is contextual. In any of the things that we talk about. Right? So in that sense, those are all very good signals to listen to. And excuse me. So let's hope that jobs would be created. Let's hope that this investment will pick up the economy. And if jobs are created, only then consumption demand is going to increase. No amount of pumping money is going to help. One last point I want to make, and that is because probably for the first time, this group has been left out. The middle class is always complaining for anything that is done. If the taxes are raised, of course, they complain. If the taxes are not reduced, they complain that why has it not been reduced? But I think there is one, for the first time, probably they may have reason to complain, especially the lower middle class, I would say, because during the COVID, as you know, that the upper class made a lot of money, right? Ajit, you mentioned Kiran's question. Indeed, they made a lot of money. Today, in the press, they say that the Ambani and Adani are more rich than Mark Zuckerberg, right? So it's good. The poorer sections who lost their jobs and had faced because of lockdown and all of that, the DBT helped them out. Right? Not all of them, but at least those who were. So many of them were helped out. And that was a good thing that the government implemented. But those who were not the Adanis and the Ambanis, and who were not part of the jam, right? They somehow got left out. So there is a very small proportion in the middle which have been seriously affected by the COVID and somehow got missed out. So I'm hoping that this job creation will get them back on. And the loss of earnings, even if not loss of jobs, the loss of earnings they had would recover. And then our consumption engine will start moving, and that may actually move the investment engine also. That's what I hope. Done, Ajit.
Thank you, Professor Shubhajit. And I'm aware that you have to leave, so I'll just detain you for a few minutes and direct my questions to you, if that's okay with you. Or can you stay with us till 12:30?
No, I cannot, seriously.
Okay. So let's straight away come to you then.
Because this is the time we are doing all these programs.
If there's one booming time, it's for economists, post-budget. Anyway, so Prabhashish, let me come to you. We'll leave the question about the fiscal space on, Kiran Karnik's question about, the top 20%, their income went up by 50%, and the bottom 20%, they lost income by 39%. So how do you take care of that through fiscally? But I want to ask you about labor, since you mentioned a lot about job creation. By the way, the finance minister did mention that 50 lakh jobs will be created from the infra capex, she said, and then Gati Shakti. But my question is to you slightly.
She said 60. She said 60 million jobs, but over the next 5 years.
Okay, but she also mentioned 50 lakh in Gati Shakti. But my question to you is the following, and it's slightly outside the budget. India's labor force participation rate, that is the adult population in between the ages of 18 to 60 or 64, is something like 8 or 900 million. And out of that, the people who are either looking for a job or are employed, that's called the labor force participation rate. So either they are unemployed but looking for a work or employed. That has dropped to 40%. Only 40% of adults, male and female, are either looking or employed. So 60% are just either they are discouraged or they're not. So, and this is one of the lowest among all peer countries. Lowest. And of course, the female labor force participation rate is down to 18 or 17%. So how do you see this? I mean, this is, isn't this also, I mean, the serious public policy issue?
It's not only a serious public policy issue. This is what we should be thinking about, quite frankly. Our biggest resource is our young population. And we talk about everything else but them. And I think we need to correct that. It's high time we correct. We cannot just talk about health education and do lip service in the social sector and all of that. We have to seriously focus on the one resource that we really have and which we can really get value from if we train them, right? So it is important for us to look at that. Number two, this labor force participation that you talked about, that people either in the job or not on the job, but looking for it, right? That's our standard definition. And come on, let's be honest, right? It's difficult in India for these people to survive without a job.
Then what happened? How are they not captured in the data then?
That's right. So we have to ask that question, right? Now, why am I saying that I don't want to be, no, I'm not interested in looking for a job. Right? There must be some lack of trust in the entire system, right? That you're doing it your own way. And that is something to worry about, that what are we doing in the labor market? That people are on the fringes of it, but not in it, as it were. And this is where I think businesses need to play a huge role, right? We need formalization of the labor market. We cannot go on with this, large informal sector year in, year out, because that does not enable skill development. That does not enable
organized sector is fearful of, anybody who comes for a job, they're fearful of the word, oh, you have to be made permanent, quote unquote, permanent.
So that has to be addressed. So what does it mean? And why is it a fear? If you seriously think about it, it is a fear because there are other ways to do it where you will not be counted as permanent labor.
The fear is from everybody, including the Provident Fund inspector will come and ruin your life. Anyway,
so we need to think about this. Now, this is a serious problem. We cannot survive like this for year on year.
I hear you say that you don't trust the data. Your labor force participation rate in India is 40%, but that seems too low. As Karl Marx used to say, the only thing worse than getting exploited is not getting exploited. So, because if you don't have a job. But I want to ask one more question, since you've done a lot of work on UID and you mentioned the crypto. There was a question from the audience saying that India is one of the most vulnerable to cybercrime and cybersecurity. And there's been no mention in the speech or any budget allocation. Are you aware of anything that we are doing to beef up our cybersecurity as a nation and also reducing cybercrime in India, including white-collar cybercrime?
Yes, and PIC, which has I know has done some work on this, or has people who do work on this, right? So yes, there is a lot of thought. The thing is that we still don't have a data policy, right? So anything that we do on cybersecurity has to be under the radar. So that's our problem. We need, we are moving towards a more digitized economy, and hence digitalization will follow. But for all those things to happen, we need proper data policies. And until that is done, I think we have to keep speculating about cybersecurity, or be on the inside to know about them.
Okay, great. So I'll let you go, but just one quick anecdote, since you don't like people to say 1 point data, but I have to report it to you before you go, Shubhashi, is that this morning I met somebody who has an MA in economics, since we are in the Economics Institute, 65% marks, which is a first class, and he is a sweeper. So that's the nature of our labor market. Anyway.
No, and even if it is an anecdote, right? Unless we can explain why this is happening, we should be worried.
Yes, this is first-hand information. Anyway, but I think I agree with you that the most important resource that India has is our labor force, our demography, and it's terribly underexploited, if not wasted. So, including our labor-intensive export policies and so on. I'm going to let you, so feel free to exit. Thank you for joining us, and quickly go to other panelists. Professor Pinaki, I have a question for you. Some of it is reflected in the questions in the chat box. This is about the CSS, the centrally sponsored schemes that you mentioned is kind of a crisis situation. Can you point out what is the way out? Meaning CSS was supposed to go down, but it's not going down. But if it goes down, then it will put the states even in a worse state. What is the way out for that? CSS.
Thank you. I think there are 3-4 issues in the context of CSS become very, very important. One is, there are 28 schemes, but under CSS, and if we analyze them, 7 or 8 takes away 90% of the expenditure. So there is a thin spread of resources across large number of schemes. I think we reduced it, it was 300 plus, but I think 28 is still large. So if we can really evolve a national consensus, and that cannot happen in the budget, I think that these are the areas.
Sorry, Dr. Vijay Kalkar, I think you have to be on mute. So Pinaki, you are saying?
Yeah, if we are actually able to develop a national consensus, yes, these are national priorities, say right to employment, right to food, right to education, right to skill development, right to clean water. And then we consolidate schemes and put money there. I think that will be something which is very, that will rationalize CSS. That is one solution. Second is, CSS is also linked to the kind of, brickbats central government gets when they keep increasing cess and such charges, because it is not shareable, but it is used to finance CSS. So it's the money effectively goes to the states, but in a different way. So right. I think there is no need for doing it like this. So if we have few schemes, and then you decide that this will be done by the states and this will be done by the centers, and then decide an appropriate division of resources. So rather than saying that I am doing it or you are doing it. So, and 40% of the money, the biggest problem in CSS is the sharing of resources. So 40% is given by the states, and states say, I don't have a say. So states' own resources get tied to central funding and central priorities. So that is another area where we need to really work on. And I would say that...
But the center cannot simply vacate and say, here, take the money, you do it yourself.
Nobody is saying that center should vacate. No, absolutely not. There are national priorities. Center should have intervention where it thinks it's nationally important. That space should be there. But the point here is in what manner, what should be the design, how do you finance it? What are its implications on state level? These are macro fiscal policy issues, which is not discussed. We only discuss whether MG allocation has gone up or gone down. I think that's not CSS discussion.
Yeah. In fact, there was a question in the chat box saying the lower allocation of MNREGA, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I think given that rural employment guarantee scheme is a proxy for unemployment insurance. So if unemployment is going down next year, then NREGA will automatically be lower. So let's not see it only in the pure black and white lens of. But Pinaki, one more question to you before I go to the other panelists, is the question which arises out of Kiran Karnik's discussion, and to some extent we already discussed it, that during this pandemic, some corporates have made very high profits. Some high net worth individuals, their wealth has gone up. Indians are now among the topmost, wealthiest people, and the bottom deciles have lost incomes, lost jobs. Is there some fiscal solution to this, and is there fiscal space for it? What kind of fiscal solution can we do to reduce this inequality, or do you think inequality is not a priority right now?
I think fiscal ability to maneuver tax rate by a national government has significantly reduced in the last 25, 30 years.
But what
Now-
about capital gains and inheritance taxes, bequests?
Capital gain tax, certainly yes, but you really cannot tax capital gain at the rate of 30% because the capital that you invest has already been taxed. So capital gain tax was introduced, but rate, I don't know. I don't want to comment whether it should be increased or decreased, but I certainly see that there is this pressure on increasing capital gain tax, and you really do not know whether we increase it further, what happens to what happens to the capital gain itself. So there are issues, and it is also that the fact that 38% of corporate tax growth rate this year also gave revenue, of course, nominal GDP, etc. But how that tax incidence works, unless we have a clear understanding of that, and India work on corporate tax incidence, we have only very few papers. So I think it's very important how much is passed on to the consumer, and whether it goes to the labor. So ultimately, who bears that burden will have to be studied, and if there is a scope for increasing, it should be increased. But to say that just they have made profit, so make the tax rate 50%, I think that's not a very good idea.
Okay,
To
but
follow.
do you advocate, there is a question in the chat box saying that DBT should be increased. We have PM Kisan, which goes to farm households, but we don't have any PM Kisan for urban rural poor people. So should we have DBT for urban poor as well?
Yes, there has been a discussion about even urban employment guarantee programs. I think there are two issues here, apart from having DBTs. I think what is most important here is when we talk about urban and employment program or DBT in the urban areas, it has got to do with migration as well. So and there is a special dimension to it. So I think these two issues become very, very critical. So in that case, I think if we have a very robust panchayat-driven rural employment guarantee program, I think the pressure on urban will be much less. And secondly, I think that this will be another centrally sponsored scheme, or it will be at the state level. So that issue also becomes very important, because states are sitting on cash surpluses in a situation like this. Also, I find very surprising when most redistributive expenditure is at the state level. Centers spending on social sector and expenditure which can affect household budget is less than 20% of the country's combined expenditure. But central budget gets so much of attention, and we don't have any discussion on the distributive aspect of budget at the state level.
Absolutely. So I'm going to move on. Partha will come to you in a minute, but Dr. Vijay Kelkar, would you like to have your intervention now, or can you come later? Dr. Kelkar, can we come to you a little later?
Yeah, anytime.
Okay, Professor Partha Ray, there was mention of central bank digital currency. A lot of people don't even know. I don't know what this is. I mean, I barely can spell the word crypto. So tell us, what is the motivation behind introducing a central bank digital currency? Is it the same thing as some people think it's the same thing as UPI, which I know it is not. So your thoughts on this?
Okay. The budget has two announcements insofar as crypto or digital currencies are concerned. First, it has, any income from the sale and acquisition of virtual and digital assets will now attract a 30% tax. That's a good news and a bad news. The good news in the sense, in an indirect way, now you know this is perfectly legal. Of course, you are aware of, there was an issue earlier where certain investors have taken RBI to the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court has given a verdict, after which there was some ambivalence. This 30% tax pending the new crypto bill, about which we are hearing for last year and a half, it is yet to see the light of the day. We now know this is at least legal and one can pay taxes. Now coming to CBDC, in the budget, there's only one sentence. So they said RBI is going to work on it. But looking at the country experiences, over the last 3 to 4 years, there's been enormous discussion on CBDC across the countries, including BIS and IMF. What has come out is one way. is in some way, crypto has become a fad. People accepted it. So in some way, when you cannot handle them, you cannot attack them, you join them. In some way, CBDC could be an indirect way of joining the crypto bandwagon in an official, direct way. Second point is, I'm uncomfortable with the word cryptocurrency. I'll be comfortable with crypto asset. I can perfectly understand crypto as an asset, even if it is backed by a cryptographic algorithm, not necessarily a real one. But when it comes to CBDC, there are issues relating to the shape and form. Could it be an app from the central bank? Could it be something like we are holding an account, all of us in this big data scenario, all of us are holding an account with the Reserve Bank of India? Anyway, paying interest on such a CBDC is out of question, because paying interest will indicate the end of the total commercial banking. So we do not know clarity, do not have clarity on that, and any country is yet to come out very categorically on this. So in some sense, we are quite ahead of that this has been announced. Another important point is there's an enormous euphoria in terms of cryptos in India. I saw one survey across the world, we have been ranked something like 6th or 7th country where there's a huge crypto euphoria, and therefore perhaps this is one way of handling it. But we do not have enough clarity. We will expect the RBI to issue the relevant circular.
Thank you. Thank you. So one main takeaway is that by taxing crypto capital gains at 30%, we are legitimizing that we understand it exists. And CBDC are right. If everybody starts having accounts in the central bank, there's no need for commercial banks at all. But anyway, so I think what we hear you is that we need to join the bandwagon, and we are one of the earliest joiners. We'll await its formal rollout. Dr. Dilip, you mentioned about extension services. And Professor Shubhashis also said that that's a very good thing. That so, are you happy with the emphasis given? Did I hear him say 50,000 crores or something? So, are you happy with the allocation for research and extension services in agriculture? And what do you think needs to be done?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at this allocation, it's around 8,513 crore for research and education. That's stable for last year also. It was the same. And if you see the situation and what is the mandate for agriculture university, the mandate is research, education, and extension. Staffs are not there. Yeah, then what you can do? Now we talk about drones. Who will analyze that data? Who will analyze, I mean, all this precision ag and all this. We should, as Professor earlier said, we need to believe on contextual research, what we are doing at our level. So it should not be something like farm in the US or something. They found that the precision ag can do this thing. Somebody has said by using drone, you can increase the income by 1 to 2%. So from where you got this data? I mean, immediately after next budget. It's not at all contextual. You have agriculture university, they have really good human capital, very, very good things. So at least I'm thinking if you want to double the income of farmers, at least double the research budget. So that's maybe 8,500, maybe double it and then gradually. It's not a 1 year game. It's for 3-4 years. So I see that it should be double at least.
And what, Dr. Dilip, what is your recommendation for livestock? Because you mentioned livestock economy as part of agriculture is increasing faster than food grain. Yeah. So what is your recommendation specifically for the livestock part of the economy?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the livestock, I mean, the countryside, I mean, that's Amul model we have set up. It's Amul model where the cooperative and things works. They give around 85 to 90 paisa back to the farmers. Yeah, that's the way. And then improved cattle and all these things. But there again, the issue comes with the non-milk cows or non-milk animal, how you will deal with them. Yeah,
the stray, the menace of the stray cattle now. Yeah,
yeah.
In Uttar Pradesh.
So there, but at least I mean, if you do it a scientific way in a rural area. So again, I'm focusing on the research on that livestock area that should be. Yeah, so solution for that. So I mean, domestic cow. Of course, we say this domestic desi cow we get well, but how much is this scope for that? going for this domestic, indigenous cows and all this stuff.
But between, as you said, the milk and dairy, which is very, very important, and then cattle and poultry, meat, these are actually the fast-growing sectors and much more attention. When we say agriculture, we forget that now more than 1/6 or maybe now 1/5 of agriculture is not even related to the food grains. We are running out of time, so I'm going to wrap up. Maybe, by the way, I should mention one of our participants, Suchitra Krishnaprasad, had pointed out to a book by Chris Pearl and Erica Payne, Advocating Taxing the Super Rich. So maybe Kiran Karnik can have a look at the book. So there seems to be a lot of response to the idea of where to generate the resources to tackle inequality. But let me now invite Dr. Vijay Kelkar, Vice President of PIC, and of course, our Guruji, economics Guruji. So Dr. Kelkar, over to you for your comments and remarks.
Ajit, first I want to join you and all, congratulating all the presenters who participated today. Brilliant presentation. I learned a lot. I want to only take my time of everybody to respond to question raised by Kiran Karnik, which is agitating many minds. I think one, if you notice, the most of the money which has our accretion of the wealth has taken place in the sectors which are non-tradable sectors. I mean, people operating in non-tradable sectors are making money. Here the problem is intervention is not taxes but competition policy. I think you have created a number of areas, monopolies, which can be avoided by having and promote more competition. You will find it impacting this wealth gains. So don't go for the problem is not taxes, problem is the competition policy. And I think please choose the right instrument. Do analyze it carefully. We get emotional and increase taxes, but taxes have long-term negative impacts on the investments, as pointed by Professor Chakravarti, that since 2011 to 2012, private investment falling dramatically in India. And God forbid if you start taxing even more, then you will find even greater problems. 60,000 or 600,000 Indians have left India who will probably and gone abroad because they find the working here is not conducive. So these are the kind of issues which are far more important for increasing investments than stabilizing this long stable tax, maintain stable tax rates. Our problems are other sectors. This is one point. Second issue, which I'm really disappointed that we have not discussed, and which raised in terms of employment, but the major employment is going to come from exports. By having a different protections import policy, in fact, this budget could have been a time where we have taken first step to reduce this growing tendency of import policy, import duties, and probably opening with RCEP would have been far more important intervention for that area. So budget is, I think we should come to more like I think advanced countries, budget should be boring, and most of the important, interesting initiatives should come, policies are outside the budget and by different agencies, including not necessarily finance ministry. So burden too much, we put too many expectations. It should not be once a year event. The structural reform should take place continuously. And I think we have to start not being prey to this media-driven emphasis on budget, which I think is far more important now to have the focus on structural issues, structural policies. And we may have to sort of do a little more deeper work and not the once a year event kind of analysis. So thanks, Ajit, for giving me 2 minutes.
Thank you. As always, wonderful, sharp closing comments. So, the one thing that we can do deficit financing in India, but the one thing we can't do deficit funding in a webinar is time deficit. So we have to obey the discipline of time. But it's been wonderful interacting with the panelists. I know Dr. Kelkar, Vikram Bapat, one of the participants, had a question regarding export policy and SEZs. It was mentioned in the budget that the special economic zone policy is going to be revamped, perhaps a modified law. And indeed, people have been asking about how can inequality be tackled and how do we, the poor are getting poorer, but nothing beats anti-poverty, nothing beats poverty, or nothing is as successful as anti-poverty policy as job creation, incomes which come through job creation. And if we follow a labor-intensive export policy, those jobs will go to the lower income people. So actually that will automatically, instead of having to tax the rich and transfer the money to the poor, nothing like creating jobs which go to the lower strata, which is labor-intensive export policy. Focus on exports, focus on being part of global value chains, avoid import substitution or barriers which don't make us competitive, globally competitive. But there are many things to discuss. I'm sorry, I'm afraid we are just running out of time. It is my pleasant duty to thank the panelists, Professor Partha Ray, Dr. Dilip Kazave, Professor Pinaki Chakravarti, and of course, Professor Shubhashis, and Pune International Center. And I will then hand over now. Thank you, Dr. Vijay Kalkar, for joining. Thank you all, the participants who have been with us. Wonderful interaction. So I will, I guess, close the seminar and maybe back to you, Dr. Vishal. You're on mute, Dr. Vishal.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Kelkar, for those wise words and encouragement. Thank you, Dr. Ranade, for chairing this session. We are all just witnessed tremendously engaging morning and afternoon learning and takeaways on the budget from experts here. Unfortunately, the event must end, but not before a round of applause and thank yous. At the outset and on behalf of Pune International Center, I would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to all our speakers. We look forward to many more engagements with you. Dr. Kelkar, Vice President PIC, thank you very much for your continuous encouragement. A very special round of applause for the PIC staff for their untiring efforts and for the planning that you put in behind every event. My sincere thanks to all PIC trustees and members for attending this session today. I also thanks the member of media for continuing and the positive coverage of the PIC events. And last, but certainly not the least, our Punekars and those who have attended this session today. We greatly appreciate your presence. We have now come to end of today's program. Thank you and wish you a great day ahead. Thank you.